Welcome to Truth Behind History. Today we are diving into the incredible story of the true cross, the relic that not only shaped Christian faith, but also rewrote the political map of Europe and beyond. Now let's be honest, when most people picture the cross, they think of church walls or necklaces. But what if I told you this symbol once sparked empires, fueled wars, and stirred up more mystery and power plays than a royal crown? This isn't just theology, this is political history wrapped in wooden legend. So, how did a Roman execution device become the most powerful icon in Western civilization? It all begins with the crucifixion itself. For Christians, the moment Jesus was nailed to the cross marked not just a brutal end, but a profound beginning. That wooden structure, once a symbol of public humiliation and death, was transformed into the centerpiece of divine redemption. Over time, it came to represent sacrifice, salvation, and the ultimate victory over sin and mortality. The cross wasn't just a symbol, it was the battle standard of God himself, at least, in the eyes of the faithful. But something changed in the 4th century that elevated this symbol from sacred memory to tangible power. Enter Helena, the mother of Emperor Constantine. Now Helena wasn't just any Roman noblewoman. According to tradition, she embarked on a dramatic pilgrimage to Jerusalem around the year 326. And there, in a moment that straddles history and legend, she reportedly unearthed the actual cross upon which Christ had been crucified. Let's pause for a second. Whether you believe she found the real thing or not, this discovery lit a fuse. Because now, the cross wasn't just a symbol. It was an object, a relic. And relics, in medieval and late antique Christianity, weren't passive keepsakes. They were conduits of power, of grace, of legitimacy. Helena's discovery launched a wave, some would say a frenzy, of relic veneration. Fragments of the cross were said to heal the sick, protect cities, and grant victory in battle. People didn't just revere the cross, they traveled for it, fought for it, even lied for it. The rise of relic culture became a kind of spiritual economy, where sacred artifacts weren't just religious tokens, they were currency. Churches built around relics became centers of power. Pilgrims flocked to sites claiming to hold slivers of the true cross. And slowly, these relics became embedded in the machinery of governance. They were paraded in military campaigns, sworn over in courts, displayed to rally support or calm rebellion. So from a hill outside Jerusalem to the thrones of emperors and popes, the story of the true cross had only just begun. And that story? It would get stranger and more dangerous, because once something becomes a symbol of divine authority, everyone wants a piece of it. Now that we've seen how the true cross became more than just a symbol, how it morphed into a sacred object of immense power, we have to ask, who exactly used that power? Because once a relic becomes a tool of legitimacy, it doesn't just sit in a church. It gets paraded, possessed, and weaponized. And the true cross? It became the spiritual equivalent of a crown jewel. Let's start with the Byzantine emperors. These were rulers who didn't just claim political dominance, they claimed divine sanction. And what better proof of that than carrying the true cross into battle? Imagine this, a golden procession winding through Constantinople, incense wafting in the air, the emperor riding tall, and behind him, held aloft by clergy, a piece of the true cross itself. This wasn't just piety, it was power. The message was loud and clear. Our rule is not just legal, it's holy. God is on our side. And in times of war, that message became even more potent. During battles, the relic would sometimes be brought to the front lines, not to fight, but to sanctify. It was like holding up a divine contract in the middle of a sword fight. But this sacred object wasn't monopolized by one empire. From Constantinople to Rome, rulers and church leaders competed for the prestige of possessing even a sliver of the true cross. Why? Because owning the relic meant owning the narrative. It meant bolstering claims of divine favor and institutional authority. That's how relics became instruments of sacred legitimacy. They weren't just revered, they were used. They propped up theocratic claims, justified imperial ambitions, and, perhaps most interestingly, they blurred the lines between church and state. And then came the Crusades. When European crusaders marched toward Jerusalem, they didn't just bring swords and armor, they brought relics. And in some cases, they brought the cross. The true cross became a rallying point, a sacred object to carry into war. It wasn't just God's will, it was God's endorsement, embodied in wood. At least, that's what they believed. But in 1187, at the Battle of Hattin, that belief was tested. The Crusaders were decisively defeated by Saladin, and the true cross, which they had carried into the battle like a divine talisman, vanished. Gone. That moment triggered not only a spiritual crisis, but a geopolitical one. Because when the most sacred relic of your cause disappears, people start asking questions. Meanwhile, cities across Europe scrambled to lay claim to their own pieces of the cross. Venice, Rome, and Constantinople all asserted their custodianship, each positioning themselves as the rightful guardian of sacred authority. But let's be real. Behind the holy language, there was power grabbing, prestige, geopolitical ambition dressed in robes. In short, the true cross was no longer just a relic. It was a form of currency, traded, contested, and used to buy legitimacy in a world where the sacred and the political had become impossible to untangle. And what happened next only deepened the mystery. So, what happens when the most sacred relic in the Christian world simply disappears? After centuries of processions, battles, and power plays, the true cross met its most mysterious chapter at the Battle of Hattin in 1187. The Crusaders had carried it into the field, confident that divine favor was literally on their side. But when Saladin's forces overwhelmed the Christian army, the cross was captured, and then nothing. No formal record, no detailed description of its destruction, no triumphant parade in Saladin's capital. Just silence. The relic vanishes from history, and with it, a symbol that had propped up centuries of Christian authority. But power doesn't like a vacuum. In the absence of the original, something strange began to happen across Europe. Fragments, supposedly rediscovered pieces of the true cross, started appearing everywhere. Cathedrals claimed them. Monasteries displayed them. Some were slivers of wood, others were embedded in ornate reliquaries. But here's the problem: if you gathered all the claimed pieces together, you'd probably end up with enough wood to build a fishing boat. So where did all these fragments come from? Many of them were unverified, untraceable, and suspiciously convenient for institutions looking to attract pilgrims or prestige. Some may have been fabricated entirely. But here's the twist: people still believed. Because belief, especially in a time of uncertainty, is often more powerful than proof. But not everyone was buying it. Fast forward to the Reformation, a theological earthquake in Europe. Protestant reformers like Martin Luther didn't just challenge papal authority, they condemned the entire relic system as idolatrous. To them, worshipping pieces of wood and bone was a betrayal of true spiritual focus. And so began the destruction. Churches were ransacked, relics burned, altars stripped bare. In some cases, relics were hidden by those who still believed. In others, they were lost forever. But even in absence, the relic still held power. And maybe, just maybe, that was the point. Some historians argue that the disappearance of the true cross actually helped central authorities. With no physical object to fight over, they could redirect devotion back toward institutions. Without a contested relic, spiritual control was easier to consolidate. There were no more rival claimants waving splinters of wood in the air. No more cross, no more chaos. In a world where proof had become a liability and absence could be molded into mystery, the true cross may have continued to shape history by not being there at all. Let's step back for a moment. It's easy to think of relics like the true cross as purely spiritual, as sacred objects floating above the mess of earthly concerns. But history rarely works that way. In fact, when you look closely, relics functioned inside a system of incentives. So the real question becomes, what did that system reward? Let's start with economics. Relics weren't just devotional magnets, they were economic engines. Picture this: a small town in medieval Europe obtains a fragment of the true cross. Suddenly, pilgrims are arriving by the thousands. Inns fill up, merchants sell food, candles, and souvenirs. The local church collects offerings. Faith becomes foot traffic, and foot traffic becomes revenue. Cities like Santiago, Rome, and Cologne built entire pilgrimage economies on the back of relic tourism. Sacred artifacts turned into anchors for religious markets, where spirituality and commerce intertwined in ways that were, well, profitable. But with profit comes power. Churches that held important relics could assert authority over others. Papal influence was reinforced not just by doctrine, but by the control of sacred objects. If your cathedral had the real relic, whether or not it actually was, you gained leverage in the ever-growing hierarchy of Christendom. And here's where it gets more complicated. When power and profit are on the line, authenticity becomes a moving target. Not because people didn't care about the truth, but because utility often won the argument. If a relic brought people together, raised money, and inspired faith, did it really matter whether it was genuine? This tension between truth and usefulness sits at the heart of relic politics. But not everyone played along. Protestants like Martin Luther rejected relics entirely. To them, this wasn't sacred tradition, it was superstition masquerading as faith. A distraction. They saw the veneration of objects as idolatry, fueling a wave of iconoclasm where churches were stripped of their artifacts and theological attention was recentered on scripture and personal belief. And yet, even the critics were reacting to the same system, a system that rewarded institutions for holding the tools of belief. Whether embraced or attacked, relics were never neutral. They were charged with meaning, surrounded by incentives, and embedded in the mechanisms of control. In the end, relics like the true cross weren't just religious symbols, they were political tools, economic assets, and perhaps most of all, reflections of the system that created them. Now let's go deeper, not into history, but into meaning. We've talked about relics as symbols of power, as tools of empire, and as engines of economy. But now, let's ask something more provocative. Was the true cross ever meant to survive? On one hand, The idea of preserving the actual cross, the physical wood that held Christ's body, carries immense emotional and spiritual weight. It makes the abstract tangible. It gives believers a bridge between time and eternity. But here's the paradox. Christianity is built on faith, on believing in the unseen. In the words of the Apostle Paul, we walk by faith, not by sight. So what happens when the faithful begin to rely on sight? On touch? On fragments of wood and nails and fabric? Could it be that the physical proof of faith actually undermines it? That's the uncomfortable question many theologians wrestled with, especially during the rise of Protestantism. For reformers, the need to see the cross, to possess it, parade it, kiss it, was a sign of spiritual immaturity. It turned inward devotion into outward ritual. It shifted the focus from the message to the material. And even within Catholicism, some thinkers began to wonder, were relics becoming idols? This is the myth versus memory dilemma. Was the true cross preserved because it truly survived, or because people needed it to survive? Was its physical survival a miracle, or a myth maintained to keep faith anchored in something visible? And here's the twist. Maybe it didn't need to be either. Maybe the true cross was always meant to vanish. Maybe its disappearance was not a historical tragedy, but a theological necessity. Without the object, the symbol becomes stronger, more universal, less open to fraud, rivalry, and manipulation. Because once you remove the relic, the story takes over. And stories, as we know, are harder to control. They spread, they evolve, they inspire. So maybe, just maybe, the absence of the cross is what kept it alive. As we come to the end of this story, the story of the true cross, we're left with more than just questions about relics or lost wood. We're left with a mirror, because this isn't just about what happened to the cross. It's about what happens when faith meets power, when belief becomes a tool, when stories are shaped, sold, and sacrificed in the name of something greater, or something more convenient. The true cross may have vanished, but its memory became a battleground for empires, for popes, for reformers, for the faithful and the skeptical alike. And maybe that's the point. Throughout history, the things we lose often reveal the most, not just about what they were, but about what we've built around them. The narratives, the systems, the assumptions we cling to. Relics like the true cross tell us something profound about human nature. That we crave certainty, that we build structures around symbols, that we're willing to fight wars over fragments, even as we claim to walk by faith. And they remind us that history is rarely clean. It's layered, twisted, rewritten, sometimes by victors, sometimes by institutions, sometimes by those with good intentions and dangerous tools. So what do we do with stories like this? We keep asking, we keep digging, we keep questioning the narratives we are handed, not to destroy them, but to understand what they mean, and why they still shape us. Because the cross may be gone, but the struggle to define it, to claim it, to use it, to understand it, is still happening. And that, perhaps, is the real relic we've inherited. If you enjoyed this dive into hidden truths and overlooked histories, make sure to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts or questions, and subscribe to Truth Behind History for more. And if you want to go even deeper, check out my book History They Tried to Erase. The link's in the description. It's packed with stories just like this, strange, forgotten, and more relevant than ever. Thanks for watching, and remember, history doesn't just repeat itself, it hides in plain sight.